You clicked on this video to finally understand what really happened inside the Spencer mansion. The investigation that started the entire Resident Evil timeline. Not just the zombies, not just the Tyrant, but the full sequence of events. The murders in Arklay, Bravo Team's disappearance, Alpha Team's arrival, and the Night Stars uncovered the truth about Umbrella. Most players only know pieces of the story, but when you lay it all out, from the first strange corpse in the forest to the final moments before the mansion exploded, the whole investigation becomes something very different. A cover-up, a set-up, and the spark that ignited decades of bioterror. So whether you're listening to fall asleep, to relax, or to have something calm in the background, don't worry, there won't be any loud jumps or sudden noises. Just a slow, steady walkthrough of one of the most important events in the entire Resident Evil timeline. Please consider subscribing if you enjoy these lore videos. It really helps. Now get comfortable, and let's go back to where it all began. The Arklay Mountains. Part 1. The Arklay Mountain murders begin. The entire nightmare that became the Resident Evil universe didn't start with a global catastrophe or a massive viral leak. It began quietly with a series of utterly bizarre and gruesome murders in the secluded Arklay Mountains. This was May 1998, and the peace of the region surrounding Raccoon City was shattered by something nobody could immediately understand. The victims were hikers and local residents who had ventured into the remote, dense forests of the Arklay region. When their bodies were found, the official reports were deeply disturbing. The corpses were often partially eaten, showing massive, savage bite marks that were far too large and aggressive for the region's known wildlife. The sheer brutality of the attacks suggested not just hungry animals, but a pack of creatures driven by an unnatural, almost singular frenzy. The local population, and eventually the Raccoon City Police Department, or RPD, had a crisis on their hands. Initially, the police brass tried to manage the situation, classifying the reports as isolated, tragic incidents involving dangerous animals. They dismissed the panic, perhaps hoping the events would simply stop. But the killings didn't stop. They intensified. More bodies were found, often near the perimeter of the exclusive, highly private Spencer estate, a vast, secluded Gothic mansion tucked away deep in the mountains. The location of the attacks was significant. The Spencer estate was known to belong to Oswell E. Spencer, one of the shadowy founders of the Umbrella Corporation. At this time, Umbrella was publicly viewed as a successful, benevolent pharmaceutical company, but its private actions suggested something far darker was brewing in the remote mountains. The RPD, under the leadership of Chief Brian Irons, who was later revealed to be deeply corrupt and secretly on Umbrella's payroll, struggled to find a credible narrative that didn't involve the absurd. The official reports mentioned missing hikers and bodies near the estate, but the cause was always vague, skirting around the possibility of something organized or manufactured. The growing public panic ultimately forced the RPD's hand. The media was beginning to speculate wildly, and citizens were locking their doors, refusing to travel into the mountains, and demanding answers from the police force. The sheer volume of the disappearances and the unusual nature of the attacks, the bodies being partially consumed, the aggression of the local wildlife, indicated that a normal police response wouldn't be sufficient. The police were dealing with a threat that seemed to transcend normal criminal activity or natural predation. This is the entire setup for the incident. The police force, driven by public fear and political pressure, finally had to deploy their most elite, highly specialized unit, the Special Tactics and Rescue Service, or S.T.A.R.S, to investigate. The The stage was set. A vague threat in the woods, a corrupt police chief covering up the truth, and a team of highly skilled but completely unprepared officers heading straight into a biological nightmare created by the pharmaceutical company hiding just a few miles away. The Arklay Mountain murders were the chilling preamble to the massive viral outbreak that was about to consume everything. The deaths weren't random. They were the messy, initial leakage of a catastrophic, top-secret scientific experiment finally boiling over into the public domain. Part 2, S.T.A.R.S is deployed. Formation, members, and mandate. The decision to deploy S.T.A.R.S, the Special Tactics and Rescue Service, was the RPD's last-ditch effort to contain the mounting panic surrounding the Arklay Mountain murders. But to understand the unit's involvement, you have to understand exactly what S.T.A.R.S was, who founded it, and why it existed in the first place. This wasn't just a standard police SWAT team. It was a highly specialized elite force with a hidden, nefarious purpose. S.T.A.R.S was founded in 1996, 2 years before the Mansion incident. Its official purpose was to be a highly trained, rapid response unit within the Raccoon City Police Department. Its mandate included search and rescue operations, counter-terrorism, and neutralizing extreme threats that the standard RPD patrol units were simply not equipped to handle. They were the best of the best, a source of pride for Raccoon City, composed of a diverse collection of experts, each with a unique, valuable skill set. The unit was organized into 2 primary squads, Alpha Team and Bravo Team. Leading the entire operation was Albert Wesker, the captain and the man who founded the unit. Wesker, outwardly charismatic and highly intelligent, commanded immense respect. The core membership was exceptional. Chris Redfield, Alpha Team, former US Air Force pilot and excellent marksman. Jill Valentine, Alpha Team, engineering and bomb disposal expert, known for her composure under pressure. Barry Burton, Alpha Team, firearms expert and massive weapons specialist, former SWAT. Rebecca Chambers, Bravo Team, a brilliant but young chemistry expert and medical specialist. Enrico Marini, Bravo Team, the solid, cautious field commander and pilot. But here's the crucial, dark truth about the unit. Wesker formed and led S.T.A.R.S not out of a commitment to public safety, but under the direct orders of the Umbrella Corporation. His true mission was to create a team of highly skilled, exceptional individuals, expose them to Umbrella's evolving BOWs, bioorganic weapons, and then collect the combat data. The effectiveness of the T-virus creatures, the zombies, the Cerberus dogs, and later the hunters, was measured directly by how well they performed against the elite training and firepower of the S.T.A.R.S members. The team was a living experiment designed to feed intelligence back to Umbrella's research facilities, particularly the Arklay laboratory. Wesker's mandate was to guide the teams, gather the data, eliminate the witnesses, and ultimately use the entire event as a testing ground for Umbrella's greatest weapon, the Tyrant. So, when Chief Irons finally authorized the deployment of the unit to the Arklay Mountains, it wasn't a rescue mission. It was the activation of a years-long plan. The skilled members of S.T.A.R.S were walking into a controlled, staged environment designed to test them to their limits and provide the final piece of combat data necessary for Umbrella to perfect its bioweapons. The Arklay incident was never intended to be solved by S.T.A.R.S. It was designed to be their final, fatal field test. This dual nature of the unit, public hero versus secret weapon, is central to the entire Mansion incident narrative. Part 3, Bravo Team, launches first. As the bizarre murders in the Arklay Mountains intensified, and public pressure reached a breaking point, the command at the RPD decided the time for the S.T.A.R.S deployment had come. Under the direction of Chief Irons and Captain Wesker, Bravo Team was the first unit sent out. This decision to launch Bravo Team before Alpha Team was critical, as it inadvertently set the stage for the sequence of catastrophic events that followed. Bravo Team's official mission was to execute a preliminary search and rescue operation. They were tasked with searching for the missing hikers, and most importantly, gathering intelligence on the nature of the aggressive attacks. They were essentially the reconnaissance unit, intended to assess the threat level before deploying the heavier firepower of Alpha Team. The team members included Captain Enrico Marini, field leader, Rebecca Chambers, medic / chemist, Richard Aiken, communications, Forrest Speyer, weapons expert, Kenneth Sullivan, field surveyor, and Edward Dewey, pilot. Their deployment seemed routine, but the entire operation was already compromised. As they flew their chopper deep into the Arklay forest, disaster struck. The helicopter experienced sudden, catastrophic engine failure. The resulting crash was violent, leaving the wreckage scattered deep within the dense, inaccessible terrain. Here's the crucial point about the crash. While the official cause was mechanical, it is widely suspected within the law that the failure was sabotage, orchestrated by Albert Wesker. Wesker's ultimate goal was to ensure the teams were completely isolated and unable to call for backup or external support while conducting the BOW combat test. Stranding Bravo Team deep in the woods accomplished this perfectly, forcing them to interact with the first waves of Umbrella's unleashed bioweapons without the benefit of organized extraction. The crash immediately scattered the team and fragmented their mission. They were no longer a cohesive unit operating under clear command. They were survivors battling immediate threats in an unknown, hostile environment. The crash forced them to split up, leading them directly into the immediate danger zones surrounding the hidden Arklay training facility, and eventually the Spencer Mansion itself. The early deployment of Bravo Team was essentially a sacrificial gambit in Wesker's larger plan. Their silence after the crash, the complete loss of contact and any data transmission, was the perfect justification for Wesker to send in Alpha Team next. This allowed him to gather all the necessary targets and actors for his staged incident in one location, setting his entire betrayal and data collection plan into motion. Bravo Team's fatal mission was the necessary prelude that trapped Alpha Team in the nightmare. Part 4, Bravo Team, crash lands in Arklay. The forced, violent landing of the Bravo Team helicopter deep within the Arklay forest immediately transitioned the S.T.A.R.S members from elite officers on a reconnaissance mission to desperate survivors fighting for their lives. The crash itself was the literal gateway into the horrors of the T-virus outbreak. The team members who survived the initial impact, Captain Enrico Marini, Rebecca Chambers, Richard Aiken, Forrest Speyer, Kenneth Sullivan, and Edward Dewey, were scattered and disoriented. Their helicopter was a total loss, and all lines of communication were instantly severed, achieving the isolation Wesker had intended. Their first steps onto the ground placed them right into the path of Umbrella's unleashed BOWs. They encountered the immediate aftermath of an accident, a gruesome scene that provided the first massive clue about the true nature of the Arklay events. They found an abandoned military-style prison transport vehicle. Inside, the guards were dead, and the wanted criminal being transported, Billy Coen, was missing. This gave Bravo Team a false lead that a dangerous fugitive was now roaming the contaminated zone, further distracting them from the true corporate source of the terror. The team split up almost immediately. They were attempting to regroup, find the fugitive and secure the area, but the environment was already crawling with the earliest released bioweapons. The first casualty was stark evidence of the new threat. Edward Dewey, the team pilot, was mauled and killed by a pack of Cerberus dogs, T-virus-infected Dobermans that were among Umbrella's first, most effective BOWs. Edward's death was a brutal, instant confirmation that they were not hunting missing hikers or dangerous wildlife. They were battling organized, engineered biological weapons. The other Bravo team members, realizing the gravity of their situation, began moving toward a prominent structure in the distance, the abandoned Ecliptic Express train. This train, overrun with T-virus victims, was the true starting point of the contamination, situated right next to the secret Arklay training facility. The crash did more than just isolate them. It exposed them to the primary source of the virus, the vengeful genius, James Marcus, and his leech experiments. Bravo team had stumbled into the center of a corporate and biological civil war, becoming the first unit to face the T-virus BOWs released from both the train and the adjacent facility. Their desperate attempts to survive the crash site and regroup led them directly into the plot of Resident Evil 0, setting up Rebecca Chambers' critical early encounter that would later influence the events within the Spencer mansion. Their nightmare began the moment they stepped out of the wreckage. Part 5. Rebecca and Billy's Encounter. RE0. The sequence of events known as Resident Evil 0 occurs immediately after the Bravo team crash lands in the Arklay forest, focusing intensely on the youngest member of the unit, Rebecca Chambers, and the escaped convict, Billy Coen. This encounter is crucial because it provides the definitive chronological explanation for the origin of the T-virus outbreak, contaminating the Spencer Mansion facility. After the initial chaos of the crash, Rebecca, the 15-year-old medic and chemist, found her way to the mysteriously abandoned Ecliptic Express train. This train was completely overrun by T-virus-infected passengers and crew. Here, she encountered the fugitive the rest of Bravo team was looking for, Billy Coen, a former Marine lieutenant being transported to execution for alleged war crimes. The dynamic between the two was strained and hostile, but the immediate, terrifying reality of the environment forced them into a reluctant partnership. They worked together to escape the train, which was rapidly filling with zombies and the specialized experimental creatures created by the primary architect of the T-virus, James Marcus. Marcus, one of the 3 original founders of the Umbrella Corporation, had been murdered years earlier by Wesker and Birkin under Spencer's orders. He had been resurrected, however, through the integration of the leech experiments he had obsessively dedicated his life to. Marcus used his control over the leeches to command the T-virus-infected BOWs and wreak revenge on Umbrella for his betrayal. Rebecca and Billy were forced to navigate from the train and deep into the adjacent Arklay training facility, the very location where Marcus had perfected the T-virus decades earlier. Their journey exposed the entire history of the progenitor virus research, the betrayal of Marcus, and the subsequent viral leak that caused the localized outbreak. This leak, traced back to Marcus's vengeful rampage, was the initial contamination that spread up the mountain, infecting the local wildlife, the hikers, and eventually the staff at the Spencer Mansion laboratory. This harrowing journey was formative for Rebecca. She confirmed that Umbrella was a bioweapons manufacturer, that the virus was real, and that the man she was forced to partner with, Billy, was not the monster, but rather the victim of a miscarriage of justice. The resolution of their partnership, where Rebecca agrees to fake Billy's death to allow him to escape, cemented her character as pragmatic and empathetic. The events of Resident Evil Zero are the unseen prelude to the main mansion incident. They explain where the virus came from and why the initial outbreak happened, providing the context for the later arrival of the Alpha team. Rebecca Chambers, having survived this impossible nightmare, would later make her way to the Spencer Mansion, carrying the crucial, horrifying knowledge of Umbrella's true purpose and the scale of the biological threat. Part 6. Kenneth and Forrest, First Fatalities at the Mansion. While Rebecca Chambers and Billy Coen were dealing with the primal source of the contamination at the training facility, the rest of the surviving Bravo team members were inadvertently heading toward the Spencer Mansion. The fates of Kenneth Sullivan and Forrest Speyer were the first brutal indications to the player, and eventually to the incoming Alpha team, that the threat wasn't just lurking in the woods. It was contained and thriving within the Gothic estate. The deaths of Kenneth and Forrest served two narrative purposes. They immediately establish the severity of the T-virus threat inside the mansion, and they provide the earliest, most gruesome evidence for the Alpha team that their comrades were dead. Kenneth Sullivan, the team's field surveyor, was the first confirmed S.T.A.R.S fatality to be discovered inside the mansion itself. He had clearly made his way inside, seeking refuge or perhaps attempting to radio for help, only to be overwhelmed by the now infected staff. When the player, Chris or Jill, enters the mansion's lavish dining room, the scene is already set. A slow-moving zombie, one of the infected former staff, is kneeling over Kenneth's body, literally consuming his flesh. The sight of Kenneth's death is a visceral, necessary shock. It instantly shatters any remaining notion that the team is dealing with human criminals or mere aggressive animals. They are faced with the undeniable reality of the T-virus, reanimated human corpses driven by a singular cannibalistic hunger. Kenneth's demise forces the survivors to confront the new reality. Their allies are not just missing. They have been killed and are now food for the very things they were sent to neutralize. Forrest Speyer, the Bravo team weapons expert, suffered an arguably more theatrical and unsettling death. His body is discovered later on the mansion's second-floor balcony. Forrest wasn't just killed by a zombie. He was found swarmed and eaten by a massive flock of crows that had themselves been infected and mutated by the virus. His death scene is a horrifying tableau, emphasizing that the contamination had affected the entire ecosystem, warping birds into carnivorous threats and leaving his corpse as a decaying centerpiece of the mansion's terror. To make Forrest's fate even more unnerving, in one version of the story, his infected body is later reanimated, turning him into a terrifying Crimson Head, a highly aggressive, faster, and more durable form of the T-virus zombie, or, in the original game, a unique, unstable zombie. His death wasn't the end, it was just the beginning of his transformation into a weapon. These two early fatalities within the walls of the mansion confirm that the estate is the focal point of the outbreak. They prove that Bravo team failed to regroup and that the threat is pervasive, requiring the surviving members to move from a search and rescue operation to a brutal, desperate fight for survival against their own mutated comrades and the engineered terrors of the Umbrella Corporation. The horrific final moments of Kenneth and Forrest serve as the initial bloody warning that sets the tone for the entire mansion incident. Part 7. Enrico's findings. There's a traitor among us. While the junior members of Bravo team were falling victim to the T-virus and its BOWs, Captain Enrico Marini, the cautious and experienced field leader, was conducting his own rigorous investigation. Enrico was a highly capable operative, and unlike the rest of the team, he quickly moved past the initial chaos and began piecing together the horrifying truth about the Umbrella Corporation and the S.T.A.R.S unit itself. Enrico's investigation led him not to the mansion's surface, but deep into the labyrinthine caves and catacombs beneath the estate. This network of tunnels connected the mansion to the secret research laboratories, providing him with access to files, research notes, and hidden areas that confirmed his worst suspicions. He was able to link the gruesome creatures, the T-virus outbreak, and the entire facility back to the pharmaceutical giant, Umbrella, and their sinister agenda of bioweapon production. Here's the critical piece of information Enrico uncovered. He realized the entire event was not an accident, but a staged, controlled experiment. He understood that someone was actively managing the chaos, ensuring the survivors were directed toward the BOWs to collect data. This revelation was horrifying enough, but his final, terrifying discovery was the existence of a traitor within the S.T.A.R.S ranks. Enrico managed to survive long enough to attempt to expose this conspiracy. He found a place of apparent safety deep within the underground passages and waited for one of the surviving Alpha Team members, either Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine, depending on the scenario, to find him. In that critical moment, just before his death, he delivered the one line that exposed the entire setup. "There's a traitor among us." Before he could name the traitor or fully explain the scope of Umbrella's plot, Enrico was violently and fatally shot. The assassination was swift and precise, silencing him forever and ensuring the critical information died with him. The unseen killer was, of course, Albert Wesker, the very captain of S.T.A.R.S and the architect of the entire incident. Enrico's finding is the narrative centerpiece of the mansion incident. His courage and deductive work provided the first, undeniable proof that the enemy wasn't just the zombies, but a much deeper, more insidious conspiracy. His murder highlighted Wesker's ruthlessness and his absolute control over the entire operation. Enrico was too thorough, too close to the truth, and he was eliminated just in time for Wesker to proceed with the final stages of his betrayal. His desperate final warning becomes the driving force for the surviving S.T.A.R.S members to push past the immediate horror and confront the corporate darkness beneath the mansion. Part 8. Alpha Team responds to Bravo's silence. The loss of all contact with Bravo Team after their crash in the Arklay Mountains created a situation that required the immediate deployment of Alpha Team. This was the activation of the second and arguably final phase of Albert Wesker's manipulation. Alpha Team was sent into the disaster, ostensibly as a search and rescue operation, but truly as the final set of test subjects for Umbrella's bioweapons. Alpha Team was dispatched under the command of Captain Wesker himself. The unit included Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, Barry Burton, Joseph Frost, and their pilot, Brad Vickers. They were flying over the dense forest terrain when they finally located the wreckage of the Bravo Team helicopter. It was a chaotic, unnerving scene. The chopper was smashed and abandoned, and there was no sign of the Bravo Team survivors. The initial brutal contact with the enemy happened almost instantly. As Alpha Team began investigating the perimeter of the crash site, they were ambushed by a pack of Cerberus dogs, the T-virus infected Dobermans that had been released from the Arklay laboratory. The assault was sudden, violent, and highly effective. Joseph Frost, the team's rear security man, was the first casualty of the Alpha Team. He was viciously torn apart by the Cerberus dogs, a sight that instantly transformed the mission from a search operation into a fight for survival. The attack triggered absolute panic within the surviving members, particularly the pilot. Brad Vickers, the team's designated extraction expert, completely lost his nerve. Overcome by the sudden, terrifying violence of the BOW attack, Brad panicked, abandoned the landing zone, and fled in the Alpha Team helicopter. He left the 4 remaining members, Wesker, Chris, Jill, and Barry, stranded on the ground, completely cut off from Raccoon City and any hope of external assistance. With a massive pack of Cerberus dogs still snapping at their heels, the survivors had only one choice. They were forced to take shelter in the nearest structure. That structure was the seemingly abandoned, monolithic Spencer Mansion. This forced retreat was the culmination of Wesker's plan. The sabotage of the Bravo helicopter, the Cerberus ambush, and Brad's planned desertion all combined to ensure the elite members of the Alpha team were isolated, disoriented, and trapped within the enclosed research facility. This was the moment the Mansion incident truly began. The 4 surviving members retreated through the Mansion's main doors, leaving the terror of the forest behind them, only to step directly into the controlled, methodical nightmare of the Umbrella Corporation's hidden laboratory. Part 9. Chris and Jill enter the Spencer Mansion. The desperate flight of the surviving Alpha Team members from the Cerberus attack ended abruptly as they slammed the massive doors of the Spencer Mansion shut behind them. This moment, the entrance into the Gothic estate, is the definitive opening of the Mansion incident investigation, and the point where the group, already traumatized, was immediately split apart. Upon entering the mansion, the environment was unsettlingly quiet and lavish. The main hall was a Gothic masterpiece of architecture, filled with suits of armor, elaborate staircases, and unsettling portraits. It was a deliberate contrast to the biological horror they had just fled. Almost immediately, the remaining 4 survivors became separated. The mansion's vast, confusing layout and the initial shock of the ambush contributed to the fragmentation. Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine, the 2 primary protagonists, found themselves separated from Captain Wesker and the heavy weapons expert, Barry Burton. This separation was not accidental. It was a necessary component of the experiment. Wesker needed the survivors to work alone or in smaller, reactive pairs to gather the most diverse set of combat data against the BOWs housed within the facility. Chris Redfield, the former Air Force pilot, often found himself alone, or with the surprise addition of Rebecca Chambers, the Bravo team survivor. His journey was marked by higher difficulty, less available ammunition, and a focus on pure combat against the mansion's threats. Jill Valentine, the demolitions and engineering expert, was often paired with Barry Burton, who served a dual role, providing heavy firepower and acting as a pawn in Wesker's plan to control her movements and ensure she didn't interfere with the central research. The investigation officially began the moment they started navigating the estate. It was no longer a search and rescue mission for Bravo team. It was a puzzle box of survival. They were forced to move through the mansion's complex corridors, solving mechanical puzzles, finding hidden keys, and most importantly, encountering the horrifying creatures that proved the mansion was far from abandoned. This entrance marked the transition from external threat to internal conspiracy. The survivors went from being hunters in the forest to becoming prey trapped in a testing environment. Every locked door, every obscure puzzle, and every sudden BOW attack was a designed component of the Umbrella facility. The mansion itself was a massive cover story, hiding the true horror of the underground laboratory and the viral experiments at its core. Their investigation had begun, and it would ultimately lead them to the truth about the T-virus and their own captain's monumental betrayal. Part 10. The Mansion, Layout and Early Encounters. The Spencer Mansion wasn't just a building. It was a complex, elaborate, and deadly maze, meticulously designed by the architect George Trevor years before the outbreak. The mansion's layout itself was a primary factor in the horror of the mansion incident, forcing the S.T.A.R.S survivors to engage with the T-virus threats on Umbrella's terms. The mansion's aesthetic was gothic and luxurious, built to serve as a high society facade for the true purpose hidden beneath it, the Arklay Laboratory. Architect Trevor, a friend of Umbrella founder Oswell E. Spencer, had unknowingly designed a series of confusing, hidden passageways, false walls, and elaborate mechanical puzzles. This design was intended to confuse trespassers, and ironically, was later repurposed by Wesker and the Umbrella staff to contain and test the BOWs. The S.T.A.R.S investigation immediately became a struggle with the environment itself. Survivors had to solve complex puzzles involving crests, musical keys, and obscure objects to unlock new sections of the estate, each leading to a new, escalating threat. The early encounters were designed to shock and disorient. Cerberus dogs, the infected Dobermans who chased them into the mansion, were a constant early threat, providing speed and ferocity. T-virus zombies, the standard, slow-moving infected staff and researchers, the classic image of the bioweapon, were the most common enemy, found decaying in hallways and dining rooms. Crimson heads, a terrifying discovery. These were standard zombies that, if not destroyed completely, usually by fire, would undergo a rapid, violent V-Act mutation. They became faster, more aggressive, and had enhanced claws, forcing the survivors to choose between precious ammunition and the psychological necessity of burning every corpse. Hunters. The introduction of the Hunter BOWs, lizard-like, genetically engineered mutants designed for combat, marked a major turning point. The Hunters were fast, lethal, and capable of instantly decapitating a human target, signaling that the mansion was now fully compromised as a controlled test zone. The mansion's complex architecture, leading from the elaborate main hall to the darker, confined wings, the residence, the courtyard, and eventually the catacombs, ensured the survivors never felt safe. Every room was a potential death trap, and every puzzle served to slow their progress, giving the BOWs time to roam and hunt. This systematic exposure to escalating threats was the entire purpose of the incident. The mansion was a large-scale experiment maze, testing the BOW's ability to hunt, strategize, and kill highly trained targets. The survivors were not solving a mystery. They were being observed in a combat simulation designed by Albert Wesker to finalize the data on Umbrella's biological arsenal. The investigation was merely the script written for the experiment. Part 11, Richard's Fate. The V-Act virus and the Yawn. Among the tragic fates of the Bravo team survivors, the story of Richard Aiken stands out as a stark illustration of the sheer biological threat posed by the T-virus and the escalating scale of the BOWs within the Spencer mansion. Richard, the team's dedicated communications expert, was not killed by a zombie or a Cerberus dog. He was taken down by one of Umbrella's massive, early biological experiments. Richard was found gravely injured within the mansion, a survivor of the initial crash who had tried to make his way through the complex structure. He had been bitten and poisoned by a gigantic, terrifying, snake-like BOW, known simply as the Yawn. The Yawn was a massive serpent mutated by the T-virus, so named because of its incredibly large, cavernous mouth and its ability to deliver a highly toxic, rapid-acting venom. The encounter with the Yawn had left Richard critically ill, suffering from the effects of the potent venom that was quickly spreading through his system. This venom was an expression of the V-Act virus, a highly aggressive viral strain or venom that caused immediate systemic breakdown. Richard's survival, or lack thereof, became a crucial, early test of the player's ability to navigate the dangerous puzzle box of the mansion. The outcome of Richard's story depended entirely on which S.T.A.R.S member found him, Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine, and how quickly they reacted. If the player found him and managed to locate the specific serum needed to counteract the potent venom, Richard would be temporarily stabilized. However, even with the serum administered, his recovery was fleeting. In scenarios where he was temporarily saved, Richard's survival served a critical purpose. He provided the protagonist with essential information and, crucially, protected them during a subsequent encounter with the Yawn. Richard would sacrifice himself, firing his weapon and drawing the creature's attention, giving the main character a chance to escape or defeat the massive snake. In scenarios where the serum was not found in time, the player would find Richard succumbing to the virus alone. His final, desperate words, a testament to the horror of the BOWs he had encountered. Richard's fate highlighted the severity and diversity of the threats within the mansion. It wasn't just about zombies. It was about highly evolved, massive biological weapons capable of incapacitating a highly trained, elite officer with a single bite. His life and death were intertwined with the very architecture of the mansion, forcing the survivors to race against the clock and the biological processes unleashed by Umbrella. His final sacrifice, if achieved, allowed the protagonist to proceed deeper into the conspiracy, ensuring that Richard's tragic end served a final, vital purpose in the investigation against the shadowy corporation. The aggressive nature of the V-Act virus and the scale of the Yawn provided undeniable proof that Umbrella was not just manufacturing bioweapons. They were unleashing monsters of unprecedented scale. Part 12. The Lisa Trevor Files. To fully understand the dark, horrifying architecture and the cruel history of the Spencer Mansion, one must uncover the tragic, tormented story of Lisa Trevor. Lisa's entire existence was a living testament to the absolute depravity and decades-long experimentation of the Umbrella Corporation. Her story is arguably the most heartbreaking thread woven into the Arklay incident lore. Lisa Trevor was the daughter of George Trevor, the renowned architect commissioned by Oswell E. Spencer to design the massive, confusing mansion. In the 1960s, under the guise of an extended visit, Spencer lured the Trevor family to the newly constructed estate. Once there, George was held prisoner until he died, and Lisa and her mother, Jessica, were taken captive to serve as Umbrella's first, most critical test subjects for the nascent progenitor virus research. Jessica Trevor quickly succumbed to the progenitor virus, but Lisa, due to a unique genetic anomaly, survived. She was an unexpected success, an immortal host whose body failed to die despite the toxic, devastating effects of the virus. For decades, from the 1960s through to the 1998 mansion incident, Lisa was imprisoned beneath the mansion, subjected to relentless, horrific experimentation, involving multiple viral strains and biological agents. The files found in the underground laboratories painstakingly detail her transformation. She was subjected to the progenitor virus, then the T virus, and her body, instead of dying, became a constantly mutating, immortal vessel. Her existence provided William Birkin, the brilliant Umbrella scientist, with the unique genetic material needed to develop the highly sought-after G virus, a fact that solidifies her importance in the overall lore. Lisa's long suffering was the horrific foundation for some of Umbrella's most dangerous breakthroughs. The mansion itself became her prison and her grave. As she mutated, she developed immense strength, a grotesque, powerful physical form. and a terrifying, obsessive psychological attachment to her lost mother. She would wear the face of her mother, constantly searching the mansion for her, driven by a primal, heartbreaking need for maternal comfort. She was not a mindless BOW. She was a sentient, immortal victim, driven by decades of torture. The S.T.A.R.S members who encountered her were faced with a creature that defied conventional understanding, a powerful, near-immortal monster whose presence was tied directly to the mansion's deepest structural secrets. The only way to truly stop Lisa was not through bullets, but through a final, tragic act that released her from her prison, often involving the destruction of her mother's remains or the activation of the mansion's core mechanisms. The discovery of the Lisa Trevor files in the lab was crucial for the S.T.A.R.S survivors. It demonstrated that the viral experiments were not a recent event, but had been ongoing for decades, starting with the betrayal of Spencer's own architect. Lisa Trevor's life provided the horrific, historical proof of Oswell E. Spencer's cruelty and the sheer depth of Umbrella's conspiracy, transforming the mansion from a house of horrors into a museum of human experimentation. Part 13. S.T.A.R.S. Uncover Umbrella's purpose. The investigation conducted by the surviving S.T.A.R.S members, primarily Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine, transitioned from a localized search and rescue operation to the uncovering of a global conspiracy the moment they breached the surface and accessed the hidden Arklay laboratory. The revelations found in the underground facility exposed the terrifying, fundamental truth about the Umbrella Corporation. The Arklay laboratory was a massive, secretive complex built beneath the Spencer mansion, serving as the primary research and development hub for the T-virus and its related BOWs. It was the epicenter of the outbreak and the core of Umbrella's evil. Once inside, the S.T.A.R.S members encountered scattered files, handwritten researcher journals, secure computer logs, and, most damningly, cages containing the various BOWs they had been fighting. The files confirmed the horrifying reality: T-virus creation. The logs detailed the entire process of creating the T-virus, from the initial discovery of the progenitor virus in West Africa to its combination with other biological agents to create the stable, mutagenic weapon. They were dealing with a virus engineered for mass contagion and biological warfare. BOW. Production. The journals provided cold, clinical details about the creation of the various creatures they had encountered: the Cerberus, the Hunters, the Yawn, and the failed attempts to create the perfect weapon. They found out that the creatures were not random monsters, but genetically engineered products of a vast corporate research budget. Spencer's true agenda. The deepest revelation concerned the motivations of Oswell E. Spencer. The investigation showed that the entire operation, from the funding of the lab to the creation of the virus, was driven by a eugenics-based agenda. Spencer's goal was not just to create bioweapons for profit, but to use the T-virus to force global evolution, creating a new, superior race ruled by himself and his fellow founders. The pharmaceutical cover was a complete fabrication. The S.T.A.R.S survivors realized they had not stumbled upon a lab accident. They had walked into a full-scale corporate testing facility. Their mission instantly transformed into a mandate to expose a global conspiracy run by the world's most powerful pharmaceutical company. They understood that the entire Arklay incident was a controlled experiment, designed by their own captain, Albert Wesker, to gather combat data and test the effectiveness of the bioweapons against highly trained human targets. This discovery provided the moral and narrative foundation for the rest of the series. The survivors realized their fight was no longer localized to the mansion, but extended to dismantling a powerful, worldwide organization dedicated to human extinction and forced evolution. The files in the Arklay laboratory turned the police officers into dedicated whistleblowers, setting them on a path that would define their lives for decades to come. Part 14. The Hunter Deployment and Mansion Overrun. The Hunter deployment marks a major, irreversible turning point in the Mansion incident. This event signaled a shift in strategy by the orchestrator, Albert Wesker, and confirmed that the Mansion was no longer a covert research hub. It was now explicitly a containment zone and a final, brutal testing ground. The Hunters were advanced BOWs, genetically engineered creatures derived from human and reptilian DNA. They were fast, incredibly agile, and possessed razor-sharp claws capable of instantly decapitating a human being. Unlike the slow, lumbering zombies, the Hunters were specifically designed for combat, infiltration, and the efficient extermination of highly trained targets. Their introduction meant that the time for observation was over. The time for decisive, high-stakes combat data collection had begun. Wesker, watching the progress of the surviving S.T.A.R.S members from his hidden monitoring stations, deliberately initiated the release of these advanced creatures. He realized that the remaining officers, Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine, had proven too resilient for the standard T-virus creatures. The Hunters were the escalation of force necessary to push the survivors to their absolute limits and finalize the combat data Umbrella needed for their superior bioweapons. The deployment of the Hunters had an immediate and catastrophic effect on the Mansion. Elimination of defense. The Hunters systematically eliminated any remaining, weaker forms of BOWs and, more importantly, any surviving Umbrella staff who might have compromised the experiment. They were the cleanup crew, ensuring only the strongest elements remained. Total overrun. The Mansion became completely overrun. The Hunters were not confined to the laboratory. They were actively hunting throughout the main residence, forcing the S.T.A.R.S members into continuous close-quarters combat. The environment, once a confusing puzzle, transformed into a constant gauntlet of potentially fatal encounters. End of investigation. The appearance of the Hunters effectively ended the investigative phase of the mission. The survivors were now entirely focused on raw survival and escape, which served Wesker's purpose perfectly. Isolate them in the deepest part of the lab for the final, staged confrontation. The deployment of the Hunters confirmed the brutal reality of the situation. The surviving S.T.A.R.S members were not heroes on a mission. They were lab rats in a highly lethal, controlled environment. They were being tested by their own employer, and the Hunters were the perfect executioners, designed to ensure the test concluded with minimal external interference. This event solidified the incident as a final, desperate battle for survival against an enemy that was not only engineered, but also strategically deployed by the person they trusted most. The sound of the Hunters' clicking claws, echoing through the empty Mansion corridors, marked the definitive end of the initial outbreak stage, and the beginning of the final push toward the lab. Part 15. Enrico's assassination. As the S.T.A.R.S survivors descended deeper into the conspiracy, the internal threat posed by the traitor became increasingly dangerous. The moment Enrico Marini, the captain of Bravo team, successfully uncovered the truth, he became the most critical liability to the entire, carefully orchestrated experiment. His assassination marks the point where Albert Wesker was forced to move from manipulation to outright, violent elimination to protect his years-long scheme. Enrico was an exceptional field commander, cautious and highly suspicious. While isolated in the caves beneath the Mansion, he used his experience to link the viral outbreak, the BOWs, and the corporate files directly to Umbrella. His final, crucial deduction, however, was realizing that a traitor within the S.T.A.R.S unit was managing the disaster. He knew the person's identity and understood their plan. Enrico managed to survive long enough to meet one of the remaining protagonists, either Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine, in a secluded location in the catacombs. His desperate, whispered warning, "There's a traitor among us," was the final, crucial piece of information the survivors needed to confirm the entire setup, but he was silenced before he could name Wesker. In a shocking display of cold efficiency, Enrico was fatally shot by the unseen traitor. The speed and precision of the gunshot indicated an enemy who was highly trained, nearby, and committed to eliminating the threat instantly. The assassination was, of course, carried out by Albert Wesker, who had been shadowing the survivors' movements through the hidden vents and surveillance systems of the laboratory. The assassination of Enrico served multiple critical purposes for Wesker's plan. Silencing the truth. It prevented the name Wesker from reaching the survivors before the final stage of the experiment, preserving his cover just long enough for him to unleash the ultimate BOW, demonstrating ruthlessness. It established the internal, human element of the betrayal, shocking the protagonist and forcing them to realize that the fight was not just against monsters, but against a highly intelligent, armed individual within their own ranks. Clearing the path. With Enrico dead, Wesker was free to proceed to the underground lab, secure the necessary data, and initiate the final phase of his betrayal, the release of the Tyrant. Enrico's death is a tragic turning point. He was the hero who solved the mystery, only to be murdered by the man he served under. His final warning, however, wasn't entirely in vain. It transformed the protagonist's investigation into a personal vendetta against an internal threat, ensuring that when the survivors finally confronted Wesker, they were prepared psychologically for the ultimate act of betrayal that was about to unfold in the deepest parts of the lab. His assassination was the cold, calculated act that cemented Wesker's status as the quintessential Resident Evil villain. Part 16. Wesker's Laboratory, Access and Tyrant Release Plan. The entire mansion incident was always a means to an end for Albert Wesker, and the culmination of his complex, multi-year plan took place in the deepest levels of the Arklay laboratory. Having successfully eliminated the liability of Enrico Marini and funneled the remaining S.T.A.R.S survivors into the final testing zone, Wesker proceeded to execute the next phase of his grand betrayal. Wesker's true purpose was twofold. He was working as a double agent for a rival organization, implied to be the entity led by Spencer's rivals, while simultaneously preparing to betray Umbrella itself. His ultimate loyalty was only to his own ambition. Upon reaching the core of the underground lab, Wesker began securing the final necessary components: BOW combat data. Wesker had been collecting real-time combat data from the entire incident, Bravo Team's initial exposure, Alpha Team's encounters with hunters, and the survivors' strategies against the Crimson Heads and Yawn. This data was crucial for developing the next generation of bioweapons and was the true currency of the experiment. The escape virus. Critically, Wesker possessed a specialized experimental virus provided by his colleague, William Birkin. Wesker intended to inject himself with this virus. The drug would temporarily kill him, allowing him to fake his death and escape the self-destruct sequence, while simultaneously granting him the superhuman strength and speed he would need to survive outside of Umbrella's control. The Tyrant release plan. The final, most crucial step was the release of Umbrella's ultimate prototype weapon, the Tyrant T-000. Wesker deliberately unleashed the Tyrant, knowing it would immediately hunt and kill the remaining S.T.A.R.S survivors. This action served multiple strategic functions. Final data collection. The Tyrant's performance against the trained elite officers would provide the final, invaluable combat data on Umbrella's most important asset. Elimination of witnesses. The Tyrant was intended to efficiently eliminate Chris and Jill, ensuring that no one remained to expose the truth about the T-virus, the lab, or Wesker's involvement. Faked death. Wesker planned to let the Tyrant severely wound or kill him in the subsequent chaos, allowing him to inject the Birkin-supplied virus, initiate his temporary death, and then escape the explosion, leaving Umbrella to believe he was an unfortunate casualty of his own experiment. Wesker's access to the lab and his plan confirmed that the entire mansion incident was a meticulously planned corporate hit job, disguised as a scientific experiment. He had used the elite S.T.A.R.S members as human shields and guinea pigs, manipulating every encounter to ensure he gained the data and the freedom he needed to launch his own independent war against the established order. The stage was set. The final confrontation would take place in the cold, clinical heart of the Arklay laboratory. Part 17. The Tyrant, T-000, awakens. The culmination of the mansion incident and the final, shattering revelation of Albert Wesker's betrayal occurred when he unleashed Umbrella's ultimate weapon, the Tyrant T-002. This moment was not just a boss fight. It was the violent end of Wesker's cover and the definitive confirmation of the terrifying conspiracy the S.T.A.R.S survivors had uncovered. In the deepest confines of the Arklay laboratory, Wesker finally dropped his facade. He revealed his true allegiance to the horrified protagonist, either Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine, confirming he was the traitor Enrico Marini had warned them about. He openly admitted that the entire incident was a staged experiment, designed to gather BOW combat data. Wesker then activated the containment system and released the Tyrant T-002, Umbrella's masterpiece prototype. The Tyrant was a massive, humanoid BOW, genetically modified and heavily armored, designed to be the perfect weapon. Its name, Tyrant, reflected its intended purpose, a biologically superior soldier capable of mass destruction. The confrontation was immediate and fatal. Wesker's plan was simple. The Tyrant would kill the remaining survivors, providing the final, crucial combat data on a successful elimination of the targets. However, the Tyrant proved to be slightly unstable. In one of the most iconic moments in Resident Evil history, the Tyrant turned on its controller. Whether by design or by the unpredictable nature of the T-virus mutation, the Tyrant attacked Wesker, impaling him on its massive claw. This was the moment Wesker had planned for. He allowed the Tyrant to seemingly kill him, using the chaos as the perfect opportunity to inject the special virus he acquired from William Birkin. The virus immediately put him into a deep, temporary state of death, allowing him to fake his demise and escape the impending destruction. The surviving S.T.A.R.S member was left alone to face the towering, unstoppable Tyrant prototype. This confrontation was a desperate, chaotic battle that required the use of heavy ordnance and quick strategy. The fight against the Tyrant was the final, brutal exam of Wesker's experiment, forcing the protagonist to use every skill they possessed to survive the attack of the ultimate BOW. The awakening of the Tyrant T-002 was the culmination of decades of Umbrella research and Spencer's dark ambition. It confirmed that the company had succeeded in creating the perfect biological soldier. The battle that followed was the final, violent climax of the mansion incident. ensuring that those who survived would carry the mental and physical scars of facing the highest expression of corporate bioweaponry. Part 18. Self-destruct. The mansion laboratory collapse. With Albert Wesker seemingly killed and the Tyrant T-002 unleashed, the remaining S.T.A.R.S survivors realized their only chance was not to defeat the enemy single-handedly, but to eliminate the entire research facility. The destruction of the Spencer Mansion and the Arklay Laboratory became the only way to contain the catastrophe and prevent Umbrella's bioweapons from reaching the outside world. The surviving S.T.A.R.S members, Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine, sometimes joined by Rebecca Chambers or Barry Burton, found and activated the laboratory's self-destruct sequence. This action initiated a timed countdown, ensuring that the entire complex would be consumed in a massive purifying explosion. This was the final, desperate move of the heroes to destroy the overwhelming evidence of Umbrella's crimes and neutralize the viral threat. The escape was a chaotic, high-stakes dash against the clock. The survivors had to race back through the collapsing, burning corridors of the lab and the mansion, which were now being rapidly destroyed by the explosion sequence. They had to navigate the complex under intense pressure, knowing that any mistake meant death, by fire, collapse, or biological weapon. The final battle on the helipad. The escape culminated on the helipad outside the mansion, where the survivors were finally rescued by their terrified pilot, Brad Vickers. However, the Tyrant T-002 was not truly defeated. The damage it sustained in the lab only caused it to undergo a second, more monstrous mutation, shedding its restrictive combat armor and becoming the Super Tyrant. The creature burst onto the helipad for one final, desperate battle. This final confrontation was the absolute peak of the incident, a terrifying last stand against the ultimate BOW. The survivors had to use everything they had, including, in some scenarios, a crucial rocket launcher provided by a rescue weapon drop, to finally defeat the Super Tyrant and ensure their escape. As the Alpha Team helicopter lifted off, the Spencer Mansion and the entire underground Arklay Laboratory were consumed in a colossal explosion. The fire and destruction served as the final seal on the disaster, destroying decades of research, countless BOW prototypes, and the physical evidence of Oswell E. Spencer's massive eugenics project. The self-destruct was a painful victory, as it destroyed the evidence, but it ensured the viral contamination would not spread, at least not immediately. The explosion marked the end of the facility, but only the beginning of the war against Umbrella. Part 19. S.T.A.R.S. Debrief and Raccoon City Cover-Up. The surviving S.T.A.R.S members emerged from the Arklay Mountains as heroes and witnesses, expecting to be hailed for containing a catastrophic biohazard. What they faced instead was a cold, calculated campaign of cover-up and corporate manipulation orchestrated by the Umbrella Corporation. Upon returning to the RPD headquarters in Raccoon City, Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine, along with Barry Burton and Rebecca Chambers, immediately reported the truth. They detailed the existence of the secret underground lab, the creation of the T-virus, the BOWs, the Tyrant, and the central involvement of their own commander, Albert Wesker, as the traitor. They presented the evidence they had managed to salvage, journals, photographs, and their own testimony, to Chief Brian Irons and the Raccoon City authorities. The response was immediate and devastatingly dismissive. Chief Irons, who was secretly corrupt and deeply entrenched on Umbrella's payroll, systematically discredited their accounts. Irons, acting as Umbrella's primary pawn within the RPD, dismissed the official report as fabrication, mass hysteria, and the ravings of traumatized officers. He claimed the deaths were due to a tragic accident and the appearance of unusually aggressive local wildlife. Umbrella's reach extended far beyond the RPD. They used their massive financial influence to manipulate the local government, police force, and media. The goal was to paint the S.T.A.R.S survivors as unstable, vengeful conspiracy theorists. The consequences for the survivors were swift and severe. Disbanding of S.T.A.R.S. Chief Irons formally disbanded the S.T.A.R.S unit, effectively neutralizing the only force capable of investigating and exposing Umbrella within the city. Internal harassment. Chris and Jill were subjected to internal investigation, disciplinary measures, and professional ridicule, rendering them powerless to act through official channels. Evidence destruction. Any physical evidence they brought back was quickly confiscated, destroyed, or suppressed by the corrupt authorities. The cover-up transformed the surviving S.T.A.R.S members into pariahs. They realized that the enemy wasn't just a corporation. It was the political and social structure of the city itself. They had fought and defeated the monsters, but they had lost the war for the truth. This forced them to abandon the official channels, transforming them from officers of the law into independent activists. The institutional betrayals solidified their commitment to fighting the conspiracy outside of the corrupted police system. Part 20, Aftermath. Chris and Jill begin the hunt for Umbrella. The cover-up following the mansion incident was a failure for Umbrella in one crucial aspect. It did not break the resolve of the surviving S.T.A.R.S members. Instead, it provided them with a singular, unshakable purpose that would define the rest of their lives and launch the decades-long global war against bioterrorism. The Arklay incident was the spark. The subsequent actions of Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine became the flame. Realizing they could not fight the massive corporate conspiracy within the corrupt system of Raccoon City, the survivors made a conscious, painful choice. They resigned from the RPD and dedicated their lives to bringing down Umbrella. This single decision is the most important foundation for the entire Resident Evil narrative that follows. Chris Redfield was the first to act decisively. Convinced that Umbrella's operation was global and that the Raccoon City branch was just one small piece of a much larger puzzle, he chose to go dark. He left Raccoon City and began a private, secret investigation into Umbrella's European and global headquarters. His hunt for the truth directly leads to the events of Resident Evil Code, Veronica, where he confronts the final threats of the Ashford family. Jill Valentine decided to stay behind. She was determined to gather definitive, irrefutable evidence of Umbrella's bioweapon manufacturing within Raccoon City, focusing on the corporation's local facilities and key figures. Her investigation leads her directly into the path of a massive second outbreak and the monstrous nemesis in Resident Evil 3. The incident's long-term legacy is the formation of the core rivalry and ideological conflict that runs through the entire series. The exposure. The documents recovered, even partially, were enough to fuel the survivors' convictions and eventually contribute to the political pressure that led to the collapse of Umbrella years later. The new adversary, Albert Wesker, having successfully faked his death and gained superhuman powers, was now free to pursue his own agenda, using the BOW data from the mansion to become a major, recurring global antagonist. Global bioterrorism. The trauma of the mansion incident led Chris and Jill to later become founding members of the BSAA, the Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance, transforming their local vendetta into a global mandate to fight bioweapons, a conflict that defines the events of Resident Evil 5 and beyond. The mansion incident, therefore, was not merely the first game in the series, it was the foundational mythos. It established the rules of the biological terror, introduced the key heroes and villains, and defined the global corporate conspiracy that drives the entire narrative. Every subsequent outbreak, virus, and monster can be traced back to that terrifying, self-contained experiment in the secluded Arklay Mountains. The legacy of the survivors is one of ceaseless, uncompromising vigilance against the corporate evil they first encountered in the darkness of the Spencer mansion.